There's a story we keep telling ourselves about empires. It goes like this. They rise, they peak, they collapse. Spain fell, Britain fell, the Soviet Union fell. And now, we're told, America is next in line, following the same inevitable pattern toward catastrophe. But what if that story is wrong? Not wrong about the challenges America faces. Those are real. Wrong about what happens next. Wrong about what decline actually means. And dangerously wrong about the lesson we should learn from history. I've spent 2 decades studying financial history, monetary systems, and the real mechanics of how power transitions between nations. And here's what the doom prophets consistently miss. The most successful empires didn't collapse. They transformed. The unsuccessful ones, they refused to adapt until it was too late. So let's rewrite the script. Not with blind optimism, but with the kind of clear-eyed analysis that actually serves us. Because the choice between dominant empire and catastrophic collapse is a false one. There's a third path, and understanding it might be the most important thing you learn about the next 30 years. Here's a question the doom narrative never asks. What happened to the Netherlands? In the 1600s, the Dutch Republic was the wealthiest nation on Earth. Amsterdam was the financial capital of the world. The Dutch East India Company was more valuable than Apple, Google, and Microsoft combined. Adjusted for era, of course. Dutch ships dominated global trade. The guilder was the reserve currency. They invented modern capitalism, the stock market, and international finance. Then Britain rose. The guilder lost its status. Dutch military power declined. By the 1800s, they were clearly no longer the dominant power. So they collapsed into chaos and poverty, right? Wrong. Today, the Netherlands has one of the highest qualities of life on Earth. Excellent healthcare, world-class education, strong democratic institutions, GDP per capita that rivals or exceeds many larger powers. They didn't collapse. They transformed from a global empire into a highly successful medium power. The same story repeats with Sweden. In the 1600s, Sweden was a military superpower that dominated Northern Europe. By the 1800s, that era was over. Did Sweden collapse? No. They transformed into one of the world's most innovative, prosperous, and stable nations. This is the pattern the doom merchants ignore. Declining from first place doesn't mean falling off a cliff. It means adjusting to a new equilibrium. Let's take the British example that gets thrown around so casually. Yes, Britain lost its empire. Yes, the pound lost reserve currency status. But did Britain collapse? Walk through London today. It remains one of the world's top 3 financial centers. English is the global language of business, science, and diplomacy, a legacy that compounds British influence. British universities are among the world's best. British cultural exports, from the BBC to James Bond to Harry Potter, generate billions and shape global culture. The average British citizen today lives better than any British person in history, including at the height of empire. Better healthcare, longer life expectancy, more opportunities. The empire is gone, but prosperity remains. Here's what actually happened. Britain made a conscious choice after World War II. They could bankrupt themselves trying to maintain empire, or they could let it go and focus on building domestic prosperity and maintaining strategic partnerships. They chose transformation. They joined what became the European Union. They maintained the special relationship with America. They kept the Commonwealth as a cultural and diplomatic network. They pivoted from military dominance to financial and cultural influence. Was it perfect? No. Was it painful? Absolutely. Did they handle everything well? Definitely not. But 30 years after losing their empire, ordinary British people were living better than ever before. That's not collapse. That's successful adaptation. Now, let's talk about something the historical analogies completely miss. The nature of wealth creation has fundamentally changed. When Spain controlled the world's silver, wealth was about resources you could dig up or conquer. Physical gold, physical territory, physical trade routes. When Britain ruled, wealth was about industrial production, factories, steel, ships, manufactured goods. But today, wealth is increasingly about innovation, ideas, and networks. Look at the world's most valuable companies. Apple doesn't own factories. They design products and coordinate networks. Google's value is in algorithms and data. Facebook's empire is entirely digital. Microsoft, Amazon, Nvidia, their power is in intellectual property and innovation capacity. This changes everything about how we should think about American decline. Consider, America produces about 22% of global GDP with just 4% of global population. But here's the crucial part. American companies create a wildly disproportionate share of global innovation. Of the world's top 100 most innovative companies, roughly 50 are American. Of the top 50 universities in the world, more than 30 are American. The US attracts more of the world's top talent than any other nation. When a brilliant engineer in India or a gifted scientist in China wants to work at the frontier of their field, they still disproportionately choose to come to America. Why? Because America has built something the historical empires never had, an innovation ecosystem that's incredibly difficult to replicate. It's not just Stanford or MIT, it's the entire network of universities, venture capital, risk tolerance, labor mobility, rule of law, and cultural acceptance of failure that make
Silicon Valley possible. China can build factories faster than America. They can graduate more engineers. But here's what they struggle with: creating the environment where someone in their garage can build the next transformative company. That requires legal systems, financial infrastructure, and cultural attitudes that don't develop quickly. This is America's actual moat, not military bases or reserve currency status, but institutional and cultural capacity for innovation that compounds over time. Okay, let's address the elephant in the room, the $36 trillion national debt. That sounds terrifying. The doom prophets say it's unsustainable. Are they right? It depends entirely on what you compare it to and what assumptions you make. First, some context. Japan's debt-to-GDP ratio is over 260%. Italy's is over 140%. France, UK, Spain, all running debt-to-GDP ratios above 100%. These countries haven't collapsed. Their citizens still live comfortable lives. Markets still function. But they're not reserve currency nations facing loss of that status, the critics respond. Fair point. So let's think through what actually matters. Debt becomes a crisis when you can't refinance it, markets won't lend to you, interest payments crowd out productive spending, your productive capacity can't support the debt service. Is America facing these conditions? Let's check. US Treasury bonds are still considered the world's safest asset. Interest rates on US debt remain remarkably low by historical standards. Even with recent increases, they're well below the rates of the 1980s and 1990s. The world is still eager to lend to America. Yes, interest payments are now around $1 trillion annually. That's a lot, but it's about 15% of federal spending and 3.5% of GDP. High, but manageable, especially if productivity growth continues. And here's the critical question the doom scenario ignores. What happens if AI and other technologies drive a productivity boom over the next decade? If AI increases productivity by even 2 to 3% annually, and early evidence suggests it could do much more, US GDP could grow significantly faster than debt. The debt-to-GDP ratio could actually improve while spending continues. I'm not saying debt doesn't matter. I'm saying it's a challenge to manage, not a predetermined catastrophe. Japan has managed higher debt for decades. The US, with stronger demographics and higher innovation capacity, can do the same, if policy adapts. Now let's talk about the dollar's reserve status, supposedly on the verge of collapse. Yes, countries are diversifying. China and Russia trade in yuan and rubles. Saudi Arabia accepts yuan for some oil sales. BRICS nations talk about alternative currencies. But let's look at actual numbers, not narratives. The dollar's share of global reserves has declined from about 70% in 2000 to roughly 60% today. That's a decline, but hardly a collapse. And that 60% is still triple the euro's share, which is the distant second place. More importantly, there's no viable alternative at scale. Could the yuan replace the dollar? Not while China maintains capital controls and lacks deep, liquid financial markets. International reserve currencies require countries to trust your rule of law and accept that they can move money in and out freely.
China isn't there and won't be for decades. Could a basket of currencies or a digital alternative? Possibly, eventually. But eventually means decades, not years. Creating new international monetary infrastructure is extraordinarily complex. The euro took 50 years of integration and still hasn't displaced the dollar. Here's what's more likely: a slow, managed transition to a more multipolar currency system where the dollar remains first among equals rather than absolutely dominant. That means America loses some privileges. It means we can't run quite as large deficits indefinitely. It means more discipline is required. But it doesn't mean collapse. It means adaptation. America doesn't make anything anymore. This claim appears in every doom scenario, and it's misleading. American manufacturing output in absolute terms is near all-time highs. We produce more than we ever have. What changed is that we do it with far fewer workers because productivity increased dramatically. Yes, we import more than we export in goods, but that's an incomplete picture. America runs a massive surplus in services: financial services, software, entertainment, consulting, education. These don't show up the same way in trade statistics, but they're increasingly what matters in a digital economy. The real question isn't, do we make things, but are we productive and innovative? And here's where it gets interesting. The pandemic and geopolitical tensions with China are driving the biggest reshoring movement in decades. The CHIPS Act is bringing semiconductor manufacturing back. Battery factories are being built across the Midwest. The Inflation Reduction Act is spurring massive investment in green energy manufacturing. Is it enough? Time will tell. But the trend is reversing, and it's being driven by both market forces and strategic policy. Exactly the kind of adaptation successful countries make. Okay, let's talk about the social decay narrative. Trust in institutions is low. Political polarization is high. Drug overdoses are a genuine crisis. These are real problems, but context matters. Trust in institutions is declining globally, not just in America. France has yellow vest protests. UK has Brexit division. Germany has rising populism. This is a developed world phenomenon driven by technological disruption and social media, not unique American decay. Drug overdoses are a tragedy, but overall life expectancy in the US was rising until COVID. It's now recovering. Crime, despite recent upticks, remains far below 1990s levels. Most Americans still live in safe neighborhoods with good schools. The best and brightest are leaving claim is empirically false. Net migration to the US remains positive. More talented people want to move to America than leave it. Student visa applications from around the world remain at high levels. Are these problems that need addressing? Absolutely. Do they indicate terminal decline? No. Society isn't collapsing. It's stressed and adapting to massive technological and economic disruption. That's uncomfortable, but it's also how change happens. Is America militarily overextended with 750 bases in 80 countries? Maybe, but let's think about what that actually buys. Those bases and alliances create a global security architecture that benefits American interests. They allow power projection. They enable alliances that balance potential adversaries. They protect trade routes that American prosperity depends on. Could America do it more efficiently? Probably. Should some commitments be rethought? Certainly. But the alternative, full withdrawal, would create power vacuums that either we'd eventually need to address at higher cost, or that would be filled by competitors in ways that harm American interests. The more important question: can America afford its military spending? At about 3.5% of GDP, US military spending is high by current standards, but far below Cold War levels, which peaked around 6% of GDP. It's affordable if the economy keeps growing. The real challenge isn't whether America can afford its military. It's whether American strategic goals require this level of spending, or whether a more focused approach could achieve security at lower cost. That's a legitimate policy debate, but it's different from saying military spending will bankrupt America and cause collapse. So if decline to collapse isn't inevitable, what should America actually do? The successful historical transitions offer a playbook. 1. Acknowledge reality without panic. You're not going to maintain absolute dominance forever. That's okay. The goal is sustained prosperity, not empire. 2. Double down on competitive advantages. For America, that means innovation ecosystems, higher education, attracting global talent, and maintaining rule of law that enables entrepreneurship. 3. Make strategic investments. Infrastructure, research, education, green energy. The things that compound over time. 4. Fix the fixable problems. Healthcare costs, housing policy, tax reform. These aren't unsolvable. They're about political will. 5. Maintain key alliances. The network of democratic allies is a massive strategic advantage. Don't squander it. 6. Accept multipolarity while maintaining leadership. You don't need to dominate everything. You need to be first among equals in the things that matter most. 7. Use fiscal discipline selectively. Not austerity, but smart spending focused on productive investments rather than consumption. None of this is radical. It's what successful countries do when they face transitions. Here's the truth the doom narrative misses. America's challenges are real, but they're not destiny. We face a choice. We can panic, assume collapse is inevitable, and either desperately try to maintain unsustainable dominance or give up and stop trying to address problems. Or we can recognize that we're in a transition, from sole superpower to most powerful nation in a multipolar world, and manage that transition intelligently. The Netherlands did it. Sweden did it. Britain did it with mixed results but ultimate success. America can do it too, and potentially better because we have advantages none of them had. Scale, innovation capacity, immigrant dynamism, democratic resilience, and geographic security. The pattern isn't rise, peak, collapse. The pattern is rise, peak, adapt, or fail. Those who adapt successfully maintain prosperity even as they lose dominance. Those who refuse to adapt face either catastrophic collapse or steady decline. Spain refused to adapt. They clung to silver, religion, and empire while letting productive capacity wither. When the silver ran out, they had nothing left.
Soviet Union couldn't adapt. Their system was too rigid. When it broke, there was no flexibility, no market mechanisms, no way to gradually adjust. Britain adapted, though not always gracefully. The result? Still a prosperous, influential nation 75 years after empire's end. The question isn't, will America collapse like Spain, Britain, and the USSR? The question is, will America adapt intelligently to a changing world? Or will we cling to unsustainable dominance until crisis forces chaotic change? The doom prophets want you to believe the first question has only one answer. Yes, collapse is coming. It's inevitable. It follows a pattern. But history offers a different lesson. Countries that recognize change early, that build on their strengths rather than desperately defending their weaknesses, that reform before crisis rather than after. These countries thrive through transitions. America has enormous advantages: a culture of innovation, rule of law, property rights, free speech that enables criticism and course correction, democratic institutions that, however messy, allow peaceful power transitions and policy changes, an economy built on ideas and human capital more than raw resources. These aren't guarantees. They're advantages that can be squandered through bad policy, division, and refusal to adapt. The script isn't written yet. We're not on stage 5 of 7, following some inexorable pattern toward collapse. We're at an inflection point where choices matter enormously. Will we choose wisely? I don't know. But I know this: believing collapse is inevitable becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If America's best minds, entrepreneurs, and citizens all decide the game is over and focus on escaping the sinking ship, then yes, it will sink. But if we recognize that transition doesn't mean collapse, that we can build a prosperous future even without absolute dominance, that the goal is sustained well-being rather than empire, then the story could be very different. 20 years studying financial history has taught me this: markets, nations, and systems are far more resilient and adaptive than the doom prophets ever account for. Yes, they stumble. Yes, they face crises. But human ingenuity, properly channeled through decent institutions, has a remarkable track record of finding ways forward. The choice is ours. We can read from the script of inevitable collapse, or we can write a new one about transformation and adaptation. I know which story I'd rather see unfold.